Henry Clay Frick, a truly ruthless man. Henry Frick was a ruthless businessman who put profit over the lives of countless workers and cared less for their safety. He had no second thoughts about using force to break up strikes, and his name became synonymous with the brutal suppression of workers' rights. You see, Frick's goal was to become a millionaire by the age of 30, and he achieved this by making shrewd business deals and manipulating the markets. He was the right-hand man of Andrew Carnegie, who was known as the King of Steel. But as we're going to see, their relationship would fail, making the two men bitter enemies for the rest of their lives. Frick's aggression and greed would lead to his downfall when he engaged in a bitter power struggle with Carnegie. The battle between Frick and Carnegie would go down in history as one of the most intense business rivalries of all time. And as a result of his active role in the dispute during the Homestead Strike in 1892, Henry Frick would face an assassination attempt. Today, we're going to uncover the shocking story of Henry Clay Frick, one of the most ruthless men in history. We're going to divulge everything from the shocking horror of the 1882 Homestead Strike that led to the deaths of several people, to the catastrophic Johnstown Flood of 1889, which left thousands of people dead, disasters that were all associated with Henry Clay Frick. Henry Clay Frick was born on December 19, 1849 in West Overton, Pennsylvania. From his early days, he was driven by a fierce desire to make a name for himself in the world and to rise above the station into which he was born. But this ambition came at a price, one that would shape his life in profound ways and leave a lasting legacy of brutal business practices. But what made Henry Frick so mean and cruel? Growing up, Frick's relationship with his father was fraught with tension. His father was a stern and demanding man who expected nothing less than perfection from his own son. Frick was often criticized and pushed to the brink of exhaustion by his father's relentless demands, leading him to develop a deep-seated need for dominance. This drive for control would manifest itself in Frick's later life as an uncompromising businessman. But Frick's ambition was not the result of his difficult upbringing alone. He was a man who saw the business world as a battleground where only the strongest survived. This intense drive and focus led him to become a key player in the steel industry. Frick was driven by an insatiable thirst for success as he delved into the world of business. His strategic shrewdness and sharp instincts would quickly seize the attention of Andrew Carnegie, the Titan of Steel. A formidable partnership was forged, one that would reverberate through the annals of history. As Frick maneuvered through the steel industry, he understood that the key to triumph lay not only in the relentless pursuit of profit, but also in seizing control of vital resources. He would uplift the business, acquiring coal mines and iron ore deposits that served as the lifeblood of his growing empire. His calculated moves allowed him to commandeer the entire production chain, from raw materials to the finished product, solidifying his dominance. But it's the disaster that would play out during his time at the Carnegie Steel Company that would halt Frick's rise to success and ruin his entire reputation. Now, the Johnstown Flood of 1889 was one of the most devastating natural disasters in American history, and Henry Clay Frick's role in the tragedy only added to the horror. Frick's South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club, a private club he was a member of, owned a dam upstream from Johnstown, Pennsylvania. The dam was originally built to create a recreational lake for the club's members, but it had fallen into disrepair over the years. Frick and the other members of the club were aware of the dam's deteriorating condition, but they did nothing to fix it. In fact, they made things worse by modifying the dam spillway to create more space for boats on the lake. These modifications weakened the dam and made it more susceptible to failure. What followed would be a deadly catastrophe. When a heavy rainstorm hit the area in May of 1889, the dam could not hold back the massive amount of water that had accumulated in the lake. The dam broke, sending a wall of water down the valley towards Johnstown. The water was more than 30 feet high in some places and moved at a speed of 40 miles per hour. The floodwaters destroyed everything in their path, including houses, businesses, and factories. The death toll was dumbfounding, with more than 2,000 people losing their lives. Although Frick was not directly responsible for the dam's collapse, his disregard for the safety of the people downstream was undeniable. Frick and the other members of the South Fork Fishing and Hunting Club were eventually held responsible for the disaster, and they were forced to pay damages to the victims' families. And if you think that's shocking, wait until you hear about the tragedy that Frick would cause just a few years later. You see, Henry Clay Frick was notorious for his inhumane treatment of workers. His anti-union stance was well known, and he would go to great lengths to suppress any attempts at organizing. However, it was Frick's involvement in the Homestead Strike of 1892 that cemented his reputation as a brutal businessman. The labor dispute arose from Frick's decision to cut wages and break the union at a steel plant in Homestead, Pennsylvania. What happened next would shock everyone. Despite attempts at negotiation, Frick refused to back down and instead hired a private army of Pinkerton detectives to crush the strike. The Pinkerton agents, armed with rifles and shotguns, would be met with fierce resistance from the striking workers. The ensuing violence was brutal and bloody, resulting in the deaths of several workers and Pinkerton agents. Even though the workers fought valiantly, they could not beat the heavily armed Pinkertons. The strike ultimately failed, and the union was disbanded. But the struggle was far from over. In the aftermath of the battle, tensions continued to escalate, and Frick found himself the target of an assassination attempt by an anarchist named Alexander Berkman. Berkman, consumed by a deep hatred for Frick and the capitalist system he represented, had decided to take matters into his own hands. He was armed with a revolver and a sharpened steel file when he stormed into Frick's office, intent on taking his revenge. The attack was swift and brutal, with Berkman firing his gun and lunging at Frick with a file. Frick fought back with all his might, even as he suffered multiple stab wounds and a gunshot to the neck. Although he survived the attack, the scars left on him were a vivid reminder of the violence that he had consumed in America during this tumultuous period. And here's the thing, Henry Clay Frick's reputation as a ruthless businessman extended far beyond perpetrating the deaths of thousands of people. His cutthroat business practices made him a force to be reckoned with in the world of finance. Frick's relentless pursuit of profit was the driving force behind his success, but it also came at a great cost to those who stood in his way. You see, Frick was notorious for using his immense wealth to bully his opponent into submission. He had no qualms about taking legal action against anyone who dared to cross him, and he would spend millions of dollars in legal fees to win his cases. His opponents often found themselves outgunned and outmaneuvered, and many were forced to settle on Frick's terms rather than face a prolonged and costly legal battle. One of the most scandalous episodes in his career was the coke and gas scandal. At the heart of the scandal were Frick's two companies, the H.C. Frick Coke Company and the Pittsburgh Gas Company, which he owned. Frick was accused of engaging in price gouging and collusion with other businesses in the area to manipulate prices and drive up profits. Despite the mounting evidence against him, Frick would remain defiant, insisting that he had done nothing wrong. He used his considerable resources to hire the best lawyers and public relations firms to defend himself and his companies. But guilt would consume Frick, forcing him to sell a stake in the Pittsburgh Gas Company as a result of the scandal. But that's not all. Frick was also a notorious art collector who would stop at nothing to acquire the pieces he wanted. He had an insatiable appetite for art, and he was willing to pay exorbitant sums of money to outbid his rivals. He would use his vast wealth to outmaneuver other collectors and acquire the works he desired. Frick's pursuit of art was often seen as a way for him to legitimize his wealth and power. His collection was a reflection of his status and influence in society. However, his tactics for acquiring art were not always ethical. Frick was known to exploit artists and dealers, using his wealth and influence to pressure them into selling their works at a fraction of their value. And if you think that's frightening, what I'm going to reveal next will blow your mind. The truth is, Frick's wealth did not bring him happiness. He was constantly striving for more and never satisfied. Frick's relentless pursuit of wealth and power came at the cost of his relationships with other people. What's terrifying is that even his family members were not going to escape his wrath. Frick's children were raised in a strict and rigid household, with their father's uncompromising nature casting a shadow over their upbringing. It was a household dominated by his love for money and power. In fact, his own daughter, Helen Clay Frick, would later reveal the extent of his misery and love for money and power. In her words, Frick loved money more than anything else in the world. He loved power more than anything else in the world, and he was unhappy. And it doesn't stop there. Frick was estranged from a son, Childs Frick, and the two had a contentious relationship. Frick was known to be a harsh and demanding father, and Childs struggled to live up to his father's expectations. His wife, Adelaide Howard Childs Frick, was known to be a patient and devoted partner, but even she was often subjected to her husband's outburst of anger and cruelty. You see, Adelaide was known to be an introvert and reclusive woman who shied away from the spotlight. Frick, on the other hand, was a gregarious and outgoing man who enjoyed socializing and being the center of attention. The two had very different personalities, and their marriage was often fraught with tension and conflict. Frick was also accused of mistreating both his wife and daughter. He was known to have a quick temper and was often impatient with those around him. In fact, his daughter once said of her father, "He was very cruel to my mother. He would throw her into the street and tell her to go back to her mother's. He was also very cruel to me. He would tell me I was ugly and that no man would ever want me." Henry Clay Frick's legacy, however, was not solely defined by unrestrained ambition. He possessed an artistic soul, an appreciation for beauty amidst the austere machinery of industry. His vast fortune became a canvas upon which he curated a collection of art that dazzled the world. He transformed his opulent residence into a sanctuary of creativity, housing masterpieces that stirred the senses and offered solace from the relentless pursuit of power. Besides, Frick played a major role in forming the United States Steel Corporation in 1901 and later became a director leading its rapid expansion and diversification. Thus, Henry Frick's rise to prominence was an intricate tapestry woven from the threads of resilience and vision. He left an indelible mark on the steel industry and the art world, forever remembered as both a titan of business and a connoisseur of beauty. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. And until next time, thanks for watching.